Today's story is Raventown Part 3 by Aakash Sharma. Jared Joe Martin. This was definitely our guy, or at least one of them. He was a man on the verge of collapse. His life was meaningless, or so was the way he chose to live what was left of it. He spent the mornings in his house, alone and doing God knows what. Around midday, he finally leaves his trailer, which is parked right at the edge of town opposite of the woods. He was an outcast for sure, but his shadow still loomed over Raventown. He would meet up at the Chandelier with the same 5 people every day and drink themselves to numbness, leaving with the occasional prostitute. Either that, or they would get into business, which was dealing to the tired students in the club looking to get an affordable high. Joe was the oldest among them, being in his 40s. The youngest was Man, along with being the shortest among them, which earned him the name Tiny, which is usually what the junkies would call him. Man was their distributor, and Tiny's special sauce was what usually got the Chandelier crowded. That's why the owner didn't really care about it, and kept a special room reserved for them. I just needed to confirm my suspicions before I told Walter. That man was like a raging storm, and if he knew about Joe, there was no doubt in my mind that Saturday night at the Chandelier would be very bloody, with more bodies dropping than needed. As I sat across from a smiling Ms. Booth, digging into breakfast, I kept running things around in my mind. I had absolutely no time to take a break from all this. A lot had happened in the past week. Fleck's suicide had been a devastating blow to Raventown. It was a shocking surprise that awaited the town, which still remained a surprise. But fortunately, there was a lot more attention given to the sudden suicide of a native deputy and the disappearance of his son than the return of Daisy Flanagan. That meant less police interference in my way. But I had to be cautious. If there's drugs involved, there could be undercover lawmen around. But considering the way this entire business was handled, I really couldn't be sure. However, that didn't give me an excuse to pull a gun whenever I felt like it, these scumbags. I would first have to dig into this entire drug spiral, and then unleash Walter on them, who, at the time, had been out of town. Abigail had been spending a lot more time with Daisy, who had been taken into psychiatric care. Her trauma had finally broken her, leading to that incident in the hospital. The doctors had her strapped and made to put in a bite guard. She was a danger to herself, as well as others at this time. I did not really visit Daisy after what happened. If I'm being honest, I was actually afraid. Not that she would pull something like this again, but I felt that me being there might have had something to do with her breakdown. I could never get the idea of the farm out of my head after that. It would always be there at the back of my mind with its claws wrapped around my thoughts. What the fuck was this farm? I really drew a blank when it came to this. I had no idea about this thing. Was it some place in those woods? Some sort of funeral place, or maybe something? I really can't tell. And even though it would have been silly to anyone else in my place, I needed to dig into this as well. I had a strong feeling that Fleck's suicide might have had something to do with it, and that's where I needed to start. After pulling another favor from Thomas Skye, I had been allowed to inspect the crime scene on my own, but it would take a while, he told me. The suicide was a very serious incident, and though it would be a while, I would get to poke around soon enough, as Skye put it himself. February. I had been sitting in the Chandelier with my fingers crossed that this would go down well. I didn't wear much of a disguise. I figured that I needed to frame a story that would justify that. I was here to help increase their network, but I needed a sample of their product first. I'm here to help you with your distribution. I have a network back in North that would increase your profits by at least 70%. That isn't being smoked away by these high school junkies. But all I need from you is a little sample. Sample? Tiny asked. Quality assurance. We need to ensure that the product you cook up in your fucking redneck trailer park is up to our standards, I told him. I'm sorry. I wish I could help you, but we are not into that business. Parker cut in, now standing up straight after leaning on the wall. No games. I'm not a cop, I told him coldly. Yeah, well, You gotta go, Tiny said, now his hand on my shoulder, ushering me out of the room. Fuck, I needed to think, and to think fast. Well, I understand that some of you may have a knack for younger girls, I asked, trying to stay as calm as possible. The fourth man in there, along with Parker, Tiny, and Joe himself, was Trav. Trav never uttered a single word, rather just stood cross-armed in the corner. The four of them remained silent, looking at each other. The room felt more claustrophobic now. I was in there with four of these fucking degenerates, and I was trying to please them with a deal. I'm sorry? Joe was the first to ask. Of course it was him. Darren Moss. He owns the Black Unicorn porn studio. He also happens to be a good friend of mine. They had another glance at each other before sitting me down. Yeah? And what the fuck does that have to do with us? Tiny asked. Well, he also runs another business, and I'm sure he could provide you with a certain amenity to help satisfy your needs. I spoke, disgusted with myself, but really not caring at that moment. I knew that I had this son of a bitch. $500,000 for any sales and your contribution for any of his girls, I spoke. I knew that all of them had conflicted ideas, but I didn't have to wait for any of them to break, which looked like it was going to be Tiny. He's got them as old, or as young as you'd like, I spoke. Prove it, Tiny said. He was met with Joe's annoyance. All I needed to do was to pull out my phone and show them the texts I had sent him while I was on the case of his wife. Alright, get this man a sample, will you? Joe told Tiny, who handed me something which was very unexpected. Here, look through the contents. $500,000 each, right? Tiny said as he showed me the contents of his phone. I felt my heart stop as he scrolled down through the gallery with pictures of a young blonde girl, a girl who lay there unmoving in the woods. Daisy. Jesus fucking Christ. This was Daisy. I felt the urge to throw up, and those fucking animals just laughed. Let's go down and get you some crystal. We're gonna make a lot of money together, Parker said excitedly. His mustache, I remember for some reason, went down to his mouth. This was it. Tiny escorted me down the stairs and into the tiny crowd of young people oblivious to what was about to go down in this little place. As I got down, I took a little dash to the bar where I knew I needed to get myself something before I collapsed on the floor or took out my gun and caused a massacre. I was met there with an unexpected surprise as Walter walked in with a fucking shotgun in his hands, clad in a leather cut with a Hell's Outcast Motorcycle Club patch sewed into it, followed by 3 other men wearing the same cut. He came in, ready for war. Hey, clear this fucking place out, said a tall man sporting a white goatee, clad in the biker cut. The music stopped and everyone turned to look at the 4 gang members in the place. What the fuck did I say? Fuck off! He let out and then fired a shot into the roof to make his point. The place cleared quickly as panicked shuffling of feet and screams filled the grim atmosphere that was now the chandelier. Joe moved toward the exit, but Walt held him back. You and your fuck buddy stay right there, he spoke in a grim tone. Walt looked at me. Sky told me. Why the fuck wasn't it you? He asked me through his fury. I didn't know for sure, I said. And now? He asked me. I drew my gun as the final person exited the chandelier. Looked through his phone. Fucking midget, I said. One of the bikers patted Tiny down and pulled out the phone, forcing him to open it as he began to tear up. Walt snatched the phone, and the look on his face pretty much meant that these guys were doomed. He gasped, and I could tell that he was shook. Jesus, that is fucked up, said another biker, standing next to Walt as he took a glance at the phone. Dill, Walt called on a biker, handing him the phone. When we're done here, you get this to the sheriff. The biker didn't question anything. He took the phone and pocketed it. Joe, Walt announced, taking off his jacket as he was handed a hammer by the man left of him. Joe froze. His fear was pretty apparent. We didn't do anything, sir, Tiny said through a weepy expression. We just found her in the woods. I pressed my gun into his back. Shut the fuck up, I barked. She came to us. She wanted to get high, so... he said now, faster. Just please let... I stuck him with my gun, dropping him down, then wrapping my foot around his neck. Shut the fuck up, I grunted. We did do stuff, but she was already out cold, man. Someone had got to... Tiny was interrupted by a loud gunshot through his head. Walt had had enough, and the bikers now pulled out guns of their own. "Joe!" Walt roared. I shoved Joe ahead and pushed him down to his knees. Walt raised his hammer to Joe's mouth and swung it around, sending almost the entire front row of his teeth down his throat. What was strange, Joe didn't cry. He just accepted his end as Walt brought the hammer down on him again and again and again. By the time Walt was done, Joe wasn't even recognizable anymore. His brain had poured out of his skull in a grisly mess, and looking at that sight, I was immediately struck with that same scent that I had learned to ignore around me. All of a sudden, that heavy stench of sin and bloodshed that I had learned to ignore struck me. The next to go was a sobbing Parker, who tried to make a run for it, but was pinned down by one of the bikers and then shot to death. Trav was then pulled toward his execution, still silent as ever. That stench now hitting me more than ever. But then, before Walt took him, he turned to look directly at me. I stared back at him, looking forward to watching Walt smash his head in. Walt brought the hammer down and sent him back bleeding with a broken nose and jaw. He stood up defiantly and looked into me again. For a moment, the world went silent as his cold gaze met mine. My anger ringing within me as he stared at me and grinned a bloody smile. "See you?" Walt paused, now confused. "At the farm," he said, jumping up to Walt and pinning him down, spitting blood and puke all over him. The bikers pulled him away and pounded him on the face to ensure that he stayed down. I walked over, raising my gun to finish the fucker off, but was interrupted by a familiar giggle. Cindy sat across the bar, raising her legs up and smiling at me, her finger ushering me over. "Come on, don't be afraid," she spoke, then biting her lip. I felt fear like never before. I was so paralyzed by it that I never even heard the police sirens. "Walt, let's go, brother," one of the bikers said. Walt obviously wasn't done here. He stood up, whispering something to the others before sending the others off with a hug. "Come here. Come to me. Let me keep you safe," Cindy said. "Let me take you with me." I felt my mind all over the place. The bikers had left, and it was only Walt, me, the 4 dead bodies in here, and Cindy. She was there too. "Take me where?" I asked her. "What?" Walt was obviously confused. "A special place. A very special place," she said. "The farm." Cindy just smiled an impressed smile at me while she bit her lower lip. She kept at it until a drop of blood ran down her lip. "Come with me, Ed," she said, extending her hand to me. "Who the fuck are you talking to, Ed?" Walt screamed at me. "Are you fucking high?" "We would love you there with us, Uncle Ed," said Daisy, who stood in her hospital straps ahead of me. "Daisy?" I stuttered. "Get out of here! Fucking get out, Ed!" Walt said at the top of his lungs, now gasping and standing up straight, covered in blood, puke, and bits of flesh as he arranged the bodies the way he wanted. I was still paralyzed. Daisy took hold of my hand. It was cold to the touch, but I felt bizarrely comforted. She had her eyes now fixated on my ear. "Kyle's father. He made her do it," said Cindy, now her hand gripping mine. Daisy was nowhere to be seen. No, fuck, no. I kept mumbling. Walt struck me across the face, sending me to the ground and out of my waking nightmare. "Stay the fuck down, Ed," Walt grunted as he aimed his gun down at me. "Have you gone fucking nuts, Walter?" I screamed at him. Shut up, shut the fuck up! You're the one who's gone nuts!" He screamed at me. The door bust open and the cops bust in. "Hands on the fucking ground, don't move!" the sheriff yelled at the two of us. "Walter, what the fuck?" I yelled at him. "I'll fucking kill him," Walter said as he shoved the barrel down in my mouth. "Take care of my girls for me, Ed," Walt whispered in my ear, the gun still in my mouth. Walt, with me as his hostage, led me out from the back of the chandelier and out into the open air, where his bike stood rested. "Take care of them for me," Walt said, letting me go, then pulling me into an embrace. I didn't get a good look at him, but I knew the man was in tears. He got on his bike and rode away. That's when the situation struck me. I ran up to my car as I watched Walt ride away into the road. There was a lot of yelling and confusion amongst the deputies. I found Atwell, and he let me sit next to him as the ride began. Walter went down alone on the road, the moon glistening off the back of his leather jacket. I think that he had found his peace knowing what had become of the animals that had violated his daughter. "Pull over to the side. Do not resist this arrest, Walter," the sheriff spoke through the speaker. Walt didn't do so much as a glance back, rather kept riding away. A man fulfilled in his vengeance, covered in the blood of his enemies, riding to nowhere. The moon lit his path for him, and the woods surrounded the road as if to bow at the man. "You okay?" Atwell suddenly decided to ask me. I didn't need to reply. "Hold on," he said, pulling the car window down and raising his pistol out, firing the first warning shot. "Stand down, Walt!" He looked back. I couldn't read into his expression. The blood made it hard to understand, but I knew he had a smile on his face. Atwell was about to fire a second shot, but I shoved him a bit, making him miss. "Fuck!" he yelled at me, trying to get a better aim. Walt's bike abruptly slowly slowed down. He raised his hands up, embracing the air as he slowly came to a halt, raising his hand over his head, accepting what was to happen, as he was pushed off his ride and pinned to the ground. Everything was a blur at that moment. The yelling, the screaming, the gasping, the engines, the crickets. But I somehow knew. I knew, after what had happened, that my job in Raventown was far, far from over. Closing my eyes, I let my hand into the air, anticipating the feeling of touch, just when Cindy's warmth took hold of my hand with hers. "I'm ready," I spoke, looking into those sparkling eyes. She smiled back and gave me a kiss on the forehead, leading me away from the chaos and into the stillness of the dark woods. So that was Raventown Part 3 by Aakash Sharma. Oh boy, things are definitely getting interesting. We got Ed accepting the darkness of Raventown / the woods. We have Walt getting his revenge and obviously getting arrested. Now we just have things going crazy all over the place in this story, don't we? I hope you guys are enjoying this one. We got 2 left, and yeah, it's going to be a good time. So if you did like the video, please do hit that thumbs up button, and if you're new to the channel, if you hit that subscribe button, just let me tell you, I genuinely appreciate it. This channel is growing, and I love it so much. I love all you guys. If you're really feeling bold, leave me a comment, let me know what you thought of the story, what you think of my narrations, and how you're doing overall. I'd love to hear from you. Down in the description, you'll find a link to the story, as well as a link tree with all my social media links, and a page where you can submit a story to me if you have one you'd like me to read on my channel. All that said, friends, I hope you're having a fantastic week, I hope you're doing well, and I hope you're staying hydrated, because that's super important. But until the next video, I guess I just have to say that I hope that you sleep well.